What we've got here is failure to communicate.
Look, up in the sky, it's a bird.
Football is a 20th century technological struggle.
I've eaten a river of liver and an ocean of fish.
I would not object to
The hanging curveball, high fiber, good scotch.
Just a bit outside.
We had a great weekend this weekend. There's a lot going on in the NFL right now. We got a special guest tonight, author Kevin Benjamin, author of the book, The Stigma of Sports in Florida. Welcome, my friend.
Hey guys, glad to be here. Appreciate it.
All right, awesome. Well, Kevin, let's start it off with a bang. Tell us about your background.
Okay, I grew up going, to spring training games, Yankees as a kid in South Florida. Grew up in Coral Springs. Dolphins games, Canes games in the fall, and that was pretty much it. Spring training and college and the Dolphins games, and then went to University of Florida. It did the whole broadcast journalism thing. Was fortunate enough to have covered Emmitt Smith and the Gators, 1988, 89, and then Spurrier came in 90. I was the sports anchor for the college TV station at the University of Florida in the summer and the fall of 90. That was Spurrier's first season in 90. And then I graduated in May and started at CBS in a small town in Dothan, Alabama. Covered Alabama, and we were the CBS affiliate for Panama City, and got to cover Florida State when they won the national championship in 93, and Alabama won in 92. And then from there I went to Sarasota, and I covered, all the college sports and the Bucs a lot at that time. And back in college at UF, we were fortunate enough to have covered the Bucs games in 88, 89, and 90 with Vinny Testaverde. And, it was pretty interesting times with Sam Perkins and going to those games back in the old sombrero. And then I've been doing freelance since I got off the air in 98, and hooked up with some radio stations on and off, covered some spring training, college football games here and there, mostly video production behind the scenes. I started writing a book about 10 years ago, finally got it done a couple months ago, and here I am, and I'm glad to be here, guys. I really appreciate you having me on.
And thanks for being here, of course. So you said you just finished a book a couple of months ago. What's the title of that book?
It's The Stigma of Sports in Florida, and it's the definitive guide to America's irrational hatred of sports teams, players, and coaches in the Sunshine State. Basically, if you listen to the national media and fans outside of Florida, they are very anti the state of Florida sports. Yeah. Any reason they could to rag on us, whether it be a coach, a player. Carl Crawford left the Rays to go to the Red Sox, and the first question out of the Boston Globe reporter's mouth was, now that you know that you're going to be playing in front of a packed house instead of 5,000 people at Tropicana Field, how do you feel? Which is a jab at us, as Rays fans, and obviously Tropicana Field is a sore thumb in the state of Florida as far as sports goes. Not anymore, I should say. The new Marlins Park is worse because they got tricked into, conning the local people out of tax money to build that stadium. So, and it tore down the Orange Bowl, which I used to go to as a kid, and it's very disturbing. So, ask away, guys. I'm glad to be here.
Now, here's something that just happened in baseball news. Did you guys see that Derek Jeter was not unanimously inducted into the Hall of Fame?
It's insane.
He was one vote off, like 39 out of 40 people.
Right, and it's an old guy, and if I have to just guess off the top of my head, it's from Oakland A's, okay, maybe that market, yeah. San Francisco, okay.
Yeah, most likely.
Okay, or Texas Rangers. I was trying to rack my brain thinking that, but it's, the rogue reporter that just wants to get it's not going to help his career, obviously, I mean, how could you not? I mean, Derek Jeter, like I interviewed him. It's not in my book because my book's about Florida sports. But when Andy Pettitte got busted with the roids and ESPN did a 5 o'clock press conference at Legends Field, Steinbrenner Field now, here in Tampa. It was at the beginning of spring training in '05, and that morning I was shooting for WCBS out of New York. It was me and another videographer. So WCBS had two videographers, and I was trying to explain to this 25-year-old sports producer that, hey, listen, let me go down to where the Yankees have their practice facilities off Himes, which is south of the stadium of, the Bucks and the Yankees Legends Field. And let me see if I can get anybody there. And turns out I was there for 5 minutes, and here comes Derek Jeter, walks right towards me. I'm like, hey, with the camera down back then, guys, you had a little bit of class back then, us reporters and stuff, not like they are now. And I said, hey, you mind doing a quick interview? He's like, yeah, but it's, what could I say? I'm like, well, just say something generic. I mean, I'm like teaching him what to say, so we can use it at 6 o'clock, because nobody's going to be able to interview him right after that. You know what I mean? Because it was a zoo, and he's not going to go to the stadium until it's time for the press conference. So I was the only one to get the interview with him. It was on ESPN that night, and he gave me a minute and a half, 2 questions, very generic. I didn't put him on the spot. I even let him look at the footage after we were done with the interview, just to prove to him that I wasn't going to put him on the spot or anything, because, like, again, it was a different time, because you didn't want to not be able to interview him again. And I think that's one of the problems with the reporters these days. They don't think about, if I piss this guy off, what's going to happen 3 games from now? Or the next time the Yankees are in town, and I'm not going to be able to get Derek Jeter because, you made him look bad. But
that's something I noticed about the interviewees whenever they were in Winston in week 17 after the Texans game. They were just going in on this man. The questions they were asking him, I was shocked about. Like,
absolutely.
It was unbelievable. Yeah, the questions they asked Jameis.
Like, are you going to stay here, or you think you're out of here? Stuff like that.
The questions that were more
30,
along the lines
like
of,
how do you feel about being in the record books?
Yeah, how do you feel about being in the record books?
Okay, well, let me tell you, when Vinny
interceptions?
Testaverde broke the record of most picks in a season, it was 22. He tied it, okay? And after the game in the locker room, Dick Crippen from Channel 8 said, Vinny, how do you feel about being, the all-time single-season interception, quarterback? And he's like, well, at least I'm in the record book, And I think it's one of the, But, he took it with a grain of salt. And Vinny, I mean, poor Vinny back then. Those teams, I mean, walking up to Paul Gruber at 6-10 and saying, hey, anything positive come out of this season? That's the kind of questions that they don't want to hear. But the thing is, Jameis, again, he look, are we going to get into him right now?
I mean, we can.
We might as well.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, Kevin, Jameis has been a bit of a conversation starter for us.
It is.
Because he's been so back and forth all year and for the past couple of years, because you can have Jameis come out and throw 400 yards and 3 touchdowns, and then it's 1 interception.
Right.
And this season, you can have Jameis come out and throw 400 yards, 3 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and fumble the ball 2 times.
But remember, guys, remember, and I say this to my friends, they're not playing fantasy football.
True enough.
Okay,
that's true. 100%.
So we're playing fantasy football. They're not playing. They don't care. Okay, now the problem is, as fans, we thrive on fantasy football. I have 3 teams on NFL.com. I got the footage popping up on my computer with the alerts. It's an awesome way. The way they have it set up now. But listen, I wrote in the book under the Florida State chapter, and Bobby Bowden would have kicked him off the team if he showed up dressed after he was told he was suspended. Remember that after the crab leg incident? He showed up after being suspended. He showed up on the sidelines, and Jimbo Fisher's like, what in the hell are you doing? What are you doing? What does he think? I thought I could play, coach. That's the kind of, that's the mentality that is the 30 interception mentality. It's the same, And I wrote about Peter Warwick, having a friend at Dillard's when he was at FSU, and he bought $400 worth of clothes for $20 because he knew the clerk. I mean, there's a time and place for this stuff, okay? I covered it in college. I saw these Gators get all kinds of stuff, and back then we didn't. It wouldn't have benefited me to see Vernon Maxwell, one of the Gators' greatest basketball players in the late '80s, at a party. It wouldn't have benefited me in broadcasting to snitch on him. Okay, so we just let it go. It wasn't like everybody had a phone back then. You know what I mean? You saw these guys at bars. They were 18 behind the counter. I mean, you didn't. I mean, but now it's different. They would get in trouble for that. It's like doing stupid stuff. You don't just walk into the locker room with a big wad of cash after your team wins the national championship and hand out crumbled up $100 bills to the guys that are in college that I mean, I understand what you're trying to do, but I mean, that was disturbingly funny, to tell you the truth.
And man, Joe Burrow snitching about it, being
let me
that's
tell you,
100% real cash.
The shot of him smoking a cigar, I loved it. You know what?
Yeah.
And it's like, what's his name? Cole, after they lost the World Series.
Garrett.
Yeah. He didn't want to do an interview. He's like, I'm not part of this team anymore. I mean, that's true. Joe Burrow, I mean, unless he wants to get a degree, which, a lot of guys now, they take a class here and there, and they can do it online. And Emmett got his degree, and it was like, he went back and took like classes online to get his degree. A lot of these guys, know that, it makes their parents happy, if anything. So.
And it's always a fallback plan.
Yeah, I mean, these guys are making so much money now. It's not even funny, But
all right. So, let me ask you this then. So, Jameis Winston goes for the year, 30 touchdowns, 30 interceptions. From what we're pulling, it seems like him and Bruce Arians are kind of butting heads a little bit. Do you think he comes back next year?
I don't think he comes back.
That's what I was thinking
I think that Bruce Arians, if he couldn't get it fixed by by the 6th or 7th week, I think that was pretty much it. Okay, and the fact that he's not fixable. It's 5 years. It's not 2. We've seen this before. You know what I mean? And he got suspended for 3 games. So he doesn't make good decisions, and that's why he's got 30 interceptions, because the quarterbacks that make the listen, you can call him a gunslinger. Brett Favre was, but Brett Favre made the playoffs. If it was the first season the Bucs hadn't been in the playoffs since he was the quarterback, bring him back. Okay, they haven't made the playoffs with him, and he's had 3 coaches, and Dirk Cutter couldn't fix him. And Bruce Arians, I just don't see. I mean, who else are you going to get? I don't know. You know what I mean? Everybody can speculate here and there. I mean, bring him back. I mean, but bring in somebody else to make him a little bit antsy.
All right, Kevin,
now we're going to take a
pause. Yeah,
okay.
We're going to take a quick break, and after the break, we're going to have Kevin back to talk a little bit more about the 2002 Bucs.
Definitely.
And we're back here with Kevin Benjamin.
Hey, guys.
Kevin, we're back.
All right.
So before we left, we were on the subject of Jameis Winston and his mistakes. So going on with the whole Buccaneers talk, let's talk more about the 2002 Buccaneers, Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Okay.
Before we go into that,
before we go into that.
The book is called The Stigma of Sports in Florida. It's available on Amazon. It is a fantastic read. I'm not a reader. I don't know how to read. But I felt the book. I knew it was good. No, but I read actually a little bit of the book. It's really good. Paperback on Amazon as well as Kindle. Check it out on Amazon. The Stigma of Sports in Florida. Definitely a good read. All right, go ahead, Kevin. Tell us about the 02 Bucs.
Okay, so when Sam Weiss was the head coach, rest in peace, he just passed away recently. He's the one. He's an offensive coach. Okay, and he drafted in the '95 draft Warren Sapp and Derek Brooks. That was the beginning of the 2002 Bucs Super Bowl championship team. Okay, and Weish, he was getting old. Alvin Harper came in from Dallas and upset the locker room and caused more chaos than Hugh Culverhouse could handle, which was chaotic in general, that front office in general back then, you know. But the Glazers came in and they hired Tony Dungy. I mean, let me tell you, when they said Tony Dungy, I had never heard of the guy. Okay? Now, he played for the Steelers Super Bowl championship team in '78. Okay? And if you were on that Steel Curtain defense, if you were on any of the defensive teams back then, you were considered Steel Curtain, even though it was more of those first two Super Bowls, actually the first three under Bud Carson, who was the defensive coordinator under Chuck Noll. He's the one that implemented the Steel Curtain defense with all those legendary Hall of Famers. I'm not going to ramble them off right now. But I personally was friends with Bud Carson. His wife and I co-anchored at ABC in Sarasota. She's one of the first ever female sportscasters in the United States. And she does the news in the morning at ABC in Sarasota at WWSB. And Bud passed away about 10 years ago. And part of the reason why the Steelers were so good in the 70s was because of that defense. Chuck Noll realized if you limit the other team's scoring and Terry Bradshaw's got the ball, he could flick it and John Stallworth or Lynn Swann are going to catch it and Franco Harrison will score 14 points at least. You know that. Okay, so that was the same concept. Here's Tony Dungy, brings in defensive coordinator Monty Kiffin. They implement or create, in fact, the Tampa 2 defense, which is so legendary, and I explain that in my book. And, you know, we see John Lynch came in, I think, a year or two later, and then Rondy Barber, and you had Simeon Rice, and then that 2002, you know, Dungy was out in '01. Again, we talked about this before we got on the air. The fans kicked Tony Dungy out. You know, which is sad, but that's just the way it was back then before the internet. If the radio stations and the TV stations didn't like the coach didn't have that long. And that's what happened to Tony Dungy. He was the nicest guy. He came up before his first year. I was anchoring at ABC in Sarasota, and he came in, sat on set with me before the season started, and sat there and talked football for 15 minutes on the air. And I loved him for that. You know, Leroy Selman did the same thing when he started the USF Bulls program. But the 2002 Bucs, you know, those drafts with Sapp and Brooks and then Lynch and Barber, I mean, and I explain this in my book, Warren Sapp's like, score give us 14, 15 points, we'll take care of the rest, you know. And that's what, you know, and again, it was different. Those guys hit. It wasn't like now, you know. But John Lynch would hit. And if you were on the field, man, your back would cringe because you could feel it. You know, I mean, you can see it now, but the way the rules are, they just don't hit like they used to. You know,
For sure.
but that Bucs team, I mean, let's be crystal clear. It was Tony Dungy's team that John Gruden took to the Super Bowl, and I'll say it again, it was Tony Dungy's team that John Gruden took to the Super Bowl. And John Gruden had all the inside scoop, had Tim Brown. He was the head coach of the Raiders right before he came over to the Bucs, so he knew all the tendencies. But that was just in that game. That defense, that season, they only allowed like 12 touchdowns in the air and like 8 on the ground. I think they only allowed like not even 20 touchdowns the entire 16-game regular season. Which, think about that for a second.
That's crazy.
Okay, so, I mean, they had Allstott, and I want to say Michael Pittman or whatever, and they had Joe Jurevicius, and then Keyshawn Johnson came in, and boom, offense gelled. Brad Johnson was an acceptable quarterback. Again, you don't need to be And I'm trying to think of a really good quarterback that wants. You don't need to be Kurt Warner to win a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Okay, you need to be Trent Dilfer, who, that season that the Ravens won in 01, they went 5 games without scoring an offensive touchdown in the middle of that
that's
season.
insane.
Okay,
That's unbelievable.
but they had Ray Lewis and Ed Reed. So again, Miami Hurricanes. Okay, let's just always go back to the Florida roots, which I love because my book is about Florida. And even though I went to the University of Florida, but I grew up going to Hurricanes games in the early 80s, and I was at that Hurricanes national championship game in 83 when they beat Nebraska with the goal line stance. And then when I started my career, I got to work in the Panhandle covering Bobby Bowden and the Seminoles and some of Alabama. And we think as Floridians, we love college football, but we think we really know a lot about college football, but our traditions really only go back to the 80s. And like when I started in Alabama, and you walk into an Alabama fan's home, there's a picture of Bear Bryant where Jesus should be. Okay, I'm serious, man. I mean, I had a friend that could ramble off the third play of the third quarter in 1967 Alabama LSU. I mean, you're born into it. We have all kinds of other allegiances, being in Florida. We got 3 pro teams. We got, now we have 5 solid college football programs, with UCF and USF, which are comparable to the Florida State Seminoles, are number 5 on my list. What do you guys think? I mean, I'm going Gators.
Agreed.
Okay. Go ahead. I'll let you guys go after the Gators. I know
I'll go UF. I'll go UCF right now.
Okay, yeah, I'll go with that.
Miami.
Okay.
USF.
USF.
And then
Florida
FSU.
State. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just.
Oh no! Hold on. Let me reverse that real quick. So you got USF, Florida Tech, West Florida,
Florida Gulf Coast.
FAU, FIU.
Yeah, but those guys.
Then Florida State.
Yeah, that's true. Well, Florida A&M, they're always. I don't know. If you ever been to a Florida A&M Bethune-Cookman game, just make sure you stay for halftime because that's the best part.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they have the best. But back to the 02 Bucks. I explained in my book about how forever the Bucks draft picks were just terrible. I mean, Trent Dilfer, I explained, was not a smart pick. They had him hang on until they knew that his contract was running out. It's the same kind of syndrome with Jameis, except they haven't invested. They've invested time, but not the money. The opposite was true with Trent. They invested all this money, and it was like time to either say, the next contract and then what happened? He went on to win the Super Bowl with the Ravens. And Steve Young left and won a Super Bowl with the Niners, and Doug Williams left, so we had and won a Super Bowl with the Redskins, and we have this stigma of sports in Florida where, there's always something with us. What's good about the college level is that we've put all these really high-profiled colleges in their places, like Ohio State. Nothing as a Gator, I feel, is better than us beating Ohio State in football for the national championship and turning around and then beating them in friggin' basketball. Okay. And I don't explain too much about basketball, but I do touch on it. The back-to-back Gators championships, and Florida is not a basketball school, whether it be on the pro level or the college level. The best kids in the state of Florida, high school, do not stay in Florida to go to play college ball. They go to colleges that are basketball schools. If my kid is a blue chipper in Florida, he's not playing for the friggin' Gators. You know what I mean? They had their time. It was fun with Billy Donovan. Florida State never really, got a glimpse of it. The Hurricanes were good for a little bit. They always were bowing out in the first or maybe second round of the dance. and I love college basketball, but the regular season is like not even existent in my book, you know. My book in my mind, I mean, because, and then, you know, like the Heat and the Magic, they're like, yeah, they're there. You know what I mean?
The greatest.
You're like, there's something for us in between football. Everything that happens when it's not football season is just to, so we can just get through our day. So we can get through our day. I mean, and I love watching hockey and I love the Bolts and everything, but as somebody who grew up in Florida that's never put on an ice skate in my life, I just can't really, I still don't even know all the rules. And I explained in hockey, I got a nice quote from Phil Esposito talking about, he had just gotten fired as the GM, I think, for the Rangers. And he heard about these investors wanting to put a team in Florida. And somebody said, why Tampa? He's like, well, I was sitting around, doing nothing. I figured if I want to get into hockey, I might as well. And why should I be cold? Why don't, so that, if it wasn't for Phil Esposito, there wouldn't be hockey, the Bolts wouldn't be here. But again, we're such a transplant state, that, the people from up north love the game. And I love going. And I got a tradition. I have to have a Molson Ice. It's, I don't know if you guys are probably too young, but the first, I think, year was in Lakeland. And then the second and third year was at Tropicana Field. And
I want to give a big shout out to Holzinger, LeCavier, Barnaby, the Groat.
Hockey's the most exciting sport to be at live. It really is.
Absolutely.
Nick, you got to go. You said you didn't. You haven't
I
gone?
Need to go. I need to go to a hockey game.
Yeah.
I was actually in downtown in Tampa near the arena, and this was maybe last year sometime, I think. I'm down there with my wife and we're walking around, and I parked on the parking garage right next to the stadium, and I was like, it was just passing my mind. I said, I kind of want to go to a hockey game tonight. And I texted the group. I'm in a big group chat with a bunch of my friends, and I was like, hey, the Lightning play this team, and everyone's like, man, that'd be such a good game to go to. And I looked at nosebleed tickets, and they were super expensive, too rich for my blood for that. And it was like a game that everybody in the group chat who's hockey fan was like, that would be a great game. And I was like, I wish I had it.
I think it was 96. It was the Flyers at the Bolts in the playoffs, and it was the highest. It was like 26,000 people. It was one of the highest attended in the NHL at the time. And I remember I was talking to Steve Levy, and he was covering a Bolts game for ESPN, and when they were covering, hockey, when ESPN got rid of hockey, it kind of like fell really far off the national television shelf because, now it's like NBC Sports Network and now you got the NBC Sports Network and CBS and, Fox Sports, and they're comparable, kind of not really comparable with ESPN, but at least they, get some really good programming, but hockey is such a niche sport, it's fun to go watch, but, I talked about how it just really is amazing that we actually have hockey in Florida, that, and I talk about the Bolts when they won, and they got hosed because the strike or the layoff or whatever you want to call it after they won in 2004. They didn't have that next season to really enjoy it like other teams did. And I tell you, I couldn't believe it. I mean, my friend texts me and he goes, I'm on the ice. And I'm like, you're crazy. And then he shows up at my door at 7 a.m. with a picture of him on the ice with Brad Richards. And I'm like, I don't know how, would you jump he's like, yeah, I just jumped, but, I'm a really good sports videographer. I've been shooting for 30 years. And then when I first shot my first hockey game, I was like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing, but,
yeah,
Yeah, back to the book. You know, the Bucks. I talk a lot about that 0-2 team and how they really it was built, and from like years earlier with Sam Weish, and Sam Weish passed recently. He was such a good guy. Uh, you know, it was a good time to be a Buccaneers fan, but it was a very difficult time because it was 5-11, 6-10, 5-11. And the stadium, we were in the NFC North, with Minnesota, Green Bay, Chicago, and Detroit, and half the stadium, I mean more than half the stadium was the opposing team.
Damn.
But to be able to watch Walter Payton down here, I mean that was just uh, it was just so much fun. But in my book, there's a lot more to than just I start off with like the 72 Dolphins and the stigma of every year. They get they have a party when the team is like 10 and San Francisco. Go ahead.
Now, before we get into the 72 Dolphins, we are going to have to take a quick
Okay.
break. And let's get right into the 72 Dolphins right when we get back after this break.
Okay.
Boom, and we're back. All right, so right before we left off, we started talking about the 72 Dolphins. Kevin, you said they throw a party every year.
Okay, yeah.
Let's hear it.
Yeah, every year, Mercury Morris and whoever's living in South Florida that was on that 72 Dolphins team, when a team has that first loss, I think the San Francisco was like 10-0 or 11-0, and then they got their first loss. That next night, they rent a hotel. They have a big party with all the old, 72 Dolphins, and they pop champagne because they are still the only undefeated Super Bowl championship team. And, back then, there was up until 78, I think it was a 14-game season. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, after 78, it's been 16 games, and there's been a few 15-1 teams. The 85 Bears were 13-0 going into the Dolphins, and Dan Marino carved them up. And then, even though the Bears won the Super Bowl that year, it was still great to see the Dolphins, the team that knocked them off. And I talk about how the 2007 Patriots, now they were 18-0 going into the Super Bowl, and at that point the media and fans were like, well, we're better, the Patriots are better than the 72 because we just won 18 games in a row and the Dolphins won 17 games in a row. And I'm like, well, yeah, but you didn't win the Super Bowl, so it doesn't mean jack, okay, until and then Eli Manning and God came down, the Manning, whatever you want to call it, aura. But, and then they went 18-1. And I have a great quote I'm not going to give it away, but I got a great quote of Mercury Morris at the beginning because they print up the Super Bowl championship T-shirts and all that stuff before with both teams. So have you ever seen a Buffalo Bills championship Super Bowl shirt? I saw one last year on a documentary from Guatemala, okay, with a third world country, with a little kid that said Buffalo Bills World Champions. It was like from 1992. So
you see them in those commercials. You see them in the commercials.
Right. That commercial. Right. So they got the other one already. You know what I mean? So I mean, they end up giving all those clothes away to the third world countries, which is pretty cool. Knowing they don't want anybody to see it, you know what I mean? But the way the world is now, you're bound to see it, But
Well, I've written a question. So, and I thought about this. With the way the internet is now, how much? Like, let's say, for example, because we know this is going to happen, the Chiefs are going to come in and beat the 49ers, right? How much is that 49ers jersey shirt going to cost? If I find somebody in Guatemala that has it,
that's just, yeah. I think the NFL security is pretty good at that stuff. I mean, because
you think so?
Have you? I'm 52. I've only seen like 2 of them in my life of the losing team.
I looked it up on eBay not too long ago, and I found an undefeated 19-0 New England Patriots pin.
Oh,
like a little hat pin.
Right,
you know what I'm saying?
No, that's
so 19-0.
right. Now, if you were a Patriots fan, I mean, see, I would like to have that just to mess with the Patriots as a collector.
Exactly.
But I don't think like I would like to send that to my cousin who's a diehard Patriots fan, just to mess with him. You know what I mean? The thing
now,
is
your cousin a Patriots fan recently?
No. He grew up in Boston.
Okay.
He's like 70.
Okay.
So he's like, calls me from the World Series in '04. He's like, I'm crying, man. But and Nick, you'll appreciate this a little bit more than Nolan. But okay, so in chapter 1 in my book is the Dolphins' 72 undefeated season. I kind of rank why people outside of Florida hate our teams in a kind of like in the scope of everything. The 72 Dolphins are the most hated by the national outside of Florida people because of what they did and how soon they did it with Don Shula just losing Super Bowl III.
Yeah.
Okay, and then 4 years later going undefeated with a brand new team. You know what I mean? And not many people know this, but I recently found out that Joe Robbie offered Bear Bryant the job before Don Shula. And Bear Bryant said, I don't think that I can get along with a lot of the players on the team, which was a lot of the black people on the team. Because Bear Bryant was the last SEC team to recruit black athletes, So, I don't want to get into any of that right now, but, so could you imagine if Bear Bryant was the Dolphins coach and they would have never went undefeated,
Right.
But I love Don Shula and, I moved to Florida from Baltimore in the summer of '74 after the Dolphins just went to 3 Super Bowls. And I knew, I lived 3 miles from the Baltimore Colts training camp, and my dad would take me to see Johnny Unitas when I was really, really little, at the end of his career, practicing.
Nice.
And so when I got to Florida, we lived on Miami Beach in a hotel for 5 months, went to my first Dolphins game, like the second week of August. It was against the Jets. And all I knew was I couldn't understand as a 7-year-old why they're called the Dolphins when they obviously have a picture of Flipper on their helmet. Okay? And so I decided to be a Jets fan from there on. And from 1974 to 2004, I was a diehard Jets fan. And then right after the last game of the season in 2004, after the Jets went 2-0, 2-2, 4-2, 4-4, 6-4, 6-6, 8-6, 8-8, like they always do, I decided to get all my entire collection together, and I sold the entire lot on eBay to some guy in New Jersey. And then I was like, I swore to myself that from this point on, I'm just going to pull for all the teams in Florida. So even though that I always really had a really good, covering the Dolphins and the Bucs, I really always wanted our teams to do well because then I would get to cover the playoffs or whatever. But
that's fair.
It just, I got sick of being a Jets fan, and I still have friends of mine that are Jets fans, and they're like, I'm pondering today whether I want to watch a Jets game or not. And I'm like, you're going to watch it. You're going to put yourself through that. It's like being a Dolphins fan now. It's just tough to be it's tough to be a Bucs fan now,
You kind of would have put yourself through the same misery being a Jets fan, Dolphins fan, Bucs fan. Well, not as much Bucs fan since 2002, but Jets or Dolphins, kind of a toss-up there at that point from the 70s to now.
No, well, in the early 80s, man, they played in those Dolphins Jets games were pretty intense.
That's true.
The 82 AFC Championship game, it was pouring down rain in the Orange Bowl, and I'm like, that stinks. I mean, and it's funny because they have the cow-nosed rays at Tropicana Field, which are kind of cool.
Yeah, the Rays at the field are cool, but I I was talking to my wife because I go to Rays games, and I asked her. I said, "Hey, what do you think happens if a ball goes in there? Like, does it hurt a Ray? What happens?"
It probably yeah, I'm sure they swim out of the way real fast. It floats, but
For Steve Irwin, baby.
yeah. But let me tell you, I was at the press conference when Vince Namoli unveiled the logo, and I grew up in Florida, and they unveil it, and he goes Devil Rays, and I'm like, I've never heard of a Devil Ray, and we thought it was going to be Manta Rays or Stingrays. We really thought it was going to be that, But
the Tampa Bay Stingrays,
Yeah.
that's a lot cooler.
Well, we never heard of a Devil Ray. I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't even know one existed. I don't even think any,
But when they got rid of it, that's when they got good.
Well, they got Madden. That's why they got good.
Now here's a couple of
Well,
questions for you.
they got rid of the devil part.
The Devil,
And then they got Madden.
Yeah, there you go.
and from there. Yeah, it kind of equals out, right?
What do you think of the Rays' new logo that they have?
You mean the big old logo? Big old one.
The big old sun, the new sun.
I saw it.
The sun
I'm
ray.
gonna look it up.
Well,
now.
are they the animal, or are they the sun? I mean,
Exactly.
And that's another thing. That's one of the problems with the Rays. They don't even know who they are. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%.
And that's the problem with that I have. Like, and I'll say this right now: when Rich Eisen did the Bucks game, on like the last few weeks there was like 2 games on NFL Network, and Rich Eisen was calling the game, and he kept referring to Tampa Bay as Tampa. Tampa's ball, Tampa, first down Tampa. and it's not, you wouldn't say, even though Green Bay is a city, you wouldn't say it's Green's ball.
Green.
Okay, and I'm just giving an analogy because Tampa Bay is a region, and it's St. Pete's team too, it's Plant City's team too. It's Tampa Bay is a region, it's not a city. So it upsets me when I wrote, like, I have notes at the end of my book, and I'm like, for all of you people that don't know, it's the Tampa Bay Rays, not the Tampa Rays. It's Tampa Bay Buccaneers, not the Tampa Buccaneers. So I get really sarcastic and in there, just because I'm so proud of our teams, and even though we haven't won a lot of pro championships, our colleges have won a lot, and that's one of the main reasons why people outside of the state hate us so much, is because they're sick of the Gators, they're sick of Bobby Bowden, they're sick of Deion Sanders, they're sick of the Canes, they're sick of the turnover chain, they're sick of the whole thing. We love it. I love the
turnover chain.
I love it. Anything that the Canes can do to be obnoxious is the Canes, and I love it.
You know what though? Everybody tried to copy it with the stupidest
stuff.
stuff.
A backpack.
But the best one, the turnover pencil.
Oh, I didn't see that.
I haven't heard about that.
I can't remember who did it. Someone did a turnover pencil. So the guy hit the sideline. Yeah, I did it. And he gave him a number 2 pencil. He put it behind his ear while he's hanging out on the sideline. Like, what?
I kind of like that one, though. I kind of like that. Our high school, we did, this was a little bit after you left. You get a big trash can, and you dunk it in the trash can. And I thought that was stupid. And
I think it's pretty cool, to be honest.
My wife is sitting there watching, and, like, in the game we went to, they were getting beat. Like, it wasn't even close. They kind of were getting single-handedly smacked down on them. And then, like, the guy's, like, walking around with the trash can. He's like, hey, is anybody going to dunk this? Nobody's even paying attention to the trash can. And somebody just looks at him and is like, just put it down. Just put that down. Amanda's like, that was the most disappointing thing I've ever seen.
The swagger is just, like, off the charts when it comes to Miami. Deion had it when he was at Florida State, and I have a whole in my book. I basically talk about, if you go to Amazon.com, the Stigma of Sports in Florida, you'll be able to read, like, the table of contents and I think some of the first chapter. But I talk about, like, the undefeated Dolphins, 72. That's, like, the main reason why everybody outside hates us. And then you have the 97 Marlins, who won the World Series and 3 days later got rid of the whole team. And And then they win again in 2003 with the Steve Bartman Cubs incident where the foul ball, Moises Alou, who played for the Marlins in '97, couldn't catch the ball, and the Cubs lost the NLCS, and the Marlins win the World Series again before the Red Sox, Cubs, and White Sox had won in 80 years. So that fact of them winning those two World Series just made it a little bit more. My Red Sox friends after '97 couldn't even talk to me. Okay, they were so distraught. They were so distraught. How could this team have won with Jim Leland? One, everybody was outcasts. You know what I mean? It's just like Major League the movie. It was just like that, and then they got rid of everybody. Okay, and then I went into the Hurricanes and how that national championship game against Nebraska in '83, basically changed the whole globe of college football recruiting to the state of Florida first. And now every college in the country comes to the state of Florida first. I mean, you can go to North Dakota State and look on the roster, and I can guarantee you there's a kid from Florida. At least one from North. You know what I mean? I'm just giving you a random, but the overflow. Not everybody could go to UM. Back in the early '80s, so the overflow was the Gators and the Seminoles. And even though Bobby Bowden was in the process of building a powerhouse, it was that '83 championship game in Nebraska. Tom Osborne, it was 31-30, I think. And all they had to do was kick the extra point at the end of the game, and they would have won the national championship for the '83 season. But Tom Osborne was like, I ain't giving these guys down in Miami any credit whatsoever. Okay, it's a fluke that they're here. Okay, and I think they just won the national championship the year before at the Orange Bowl. I have to check that, but he, decided to go for two, and Miami stopped him, and the rest is history. And the recruiting is just off the charts. And I talk about a kid that played for Sarasota High School named Herb Haygood. He's the best high school football player I've ever seen in my life. Okay, and he went to Michigan State, and he got drafted, I think, by the Panthers, and barely, I don't even think he played a snap or two. But it just goes to show you the abundance of talent in high schools that we have here. It used to be California, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Texas. Those were the big high school powerhouse states. Now it's Florida.
Right.
Now everybody comes to Florida. And like a perfect example. I talk about Emmett, where he was. I think he went to Escambia in Pensacola, and he wasn't recruited at all. He ended up going to the Gators because, he had a chance to play. And the Gators were nothing back in the late 80s. I mean, they were nothing.
Yeah.
Okay. And, so he came in and kicked butt. And when he got drafted like 17th by the Cowboys. And in the press conference after the draft, he's like, I feel sorry for the other teams that passed me up. Well, the rest is history. He's the NFL's all-time leading rusher.
Yeah.
And no matter, and that's, again, that's a plus on all of our Floridians' little sports bedpost, where we can, here's another only in Florida, could this guy have played and gotten this good, And I give credit for, the Cowboys for drafting him and giving him the opportunity because, I mean, Jimmy Johnson and Jerry Jones was. And I talked about Jimmy Johnson. I got a chapter on Jimmy Johnson. I don't think he should be in the Hall of Fame. Not before Tom Flores, Oakland Raiders head coach, 2 Super Bowls. Okay. And I would like to think that Jerry Jones being in there had a lot to do with it. So, I mean, that's the whole.
Let me ask you of this. I gotta say this, man. I gotta give Jimmy Johnson credit because to win with Jerry Jones.
Right.
It's tough. I mean, Bill Parcells said it best. Is like, he wants to do all the hand picking and he wants you to operate. And it's like.
No, he's a puppet. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why
So
that's why he left.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let me tell you, Jimmy was 80-64. Is that a Hall of Fame record?
No.
Okay.
Not at all.
So
No. You're hurting my heart right now, man. But okay.
no, listen. He's in the Hall of Fame, and I'm not going to take anything away from him. I listen. If you watch that live on Fox, did you see that at halftime the other day when they announced?
Yeah, I did. Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, I did.
If a tear didn't come to your eye, then you are not a sports fan.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely felt
But
that.
I talk about Jimmy in my list of like in order of who is hated most. People don't like Jimmy, because of what he did at Miami. And then, Wayne Huizenga has the gall to get rid of Don Shula and bring in Jimmy Johnson. Okay, everybody thought Mike Shula was going to be the head coach. I mean, you can ask any Dolphins fan. They thought Mike Shula was going to take over for his dad, and it would have been fine. But they brought in Jimmy Johnson, and I remember being on there. I'm like, it ain't going to work. Dan Marino's not going to get along with him, and they didn't get along. And then I go into a chapter on Emmett with all of his accolades, and then I talk about Spurrier. He won the Heisman Trophy with the Gators, and then he came back as the head coach, and it was like the Gainesville murders had taken place that Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday before Spurrier's first game as head coach, and it was up to him whether John Lombardi, the University of Florida president, gave Spurrier the option to either play the game on Saturday, which was his first game as head coach, or postpone it, and he decided that it would be soothing for the community, to play the game. And we had a 5-minute moment of silence. It was very classy. And I don't think that any other new head coach could have done that the way it could have been done, because he won the Heisman Trophy and was already well liked in the community. And everybody was like, oh my God, thank God that he's coming back to coach our team. And he was just such a good guy, and I was fortunate to have been the sports anchor at the college TV station in the summer and the fall of '90, and his first year was the fall, and he would come over and sit on set with me on Thursdays before games, and I thought that was so cool. And then, his head got a little bit big a couple years later, and we all know that they kept the camera on him. He was the first coach that they kept the camera on the whole game. So he could throw down his visor, but him and Bobby Bowden, there's this great the first ever meeting in '90 was the Gators at Florida State. I think Florida State won like 52-10, and it's a great cover of the Tribe football program of Bobby Bowden looking into his playbook with Spurrier with his playbook under his arm, like tiptoeing, trying to look over his shoulder. Like, what do you got there, coach? Talk to me, I eventually had that program signed by both of them. I gave it to a friend of mine. And then I talk about, the Gators going back-to-back in hoops. The Gators won, the Final Four, and then the football team won the national championship, and then the Gators won the Final Four again. And,
So, Kevin, I want to transition us to probably one of your more infamous. So Deion Sanders. So before we transition to this one, I got to ask you, do you think he's the best corner of all time? If not,
he's the best corner of all time because they shut down the whole side of the field.
It's true.
So
fair enough.
And I wrote in my book that he couldn't tackle worth a damn, and he hated tackling.
Fair enough.
Okay, so but
that's the linebacker's job.
He was electric, and Deion, before the internet, was, I mean, he would, on Tuesday in media day, he would pick out a player and look in the camera and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do to you, okay? And then before the game, he would walk up to the player while he's stretching and say, I don't know if you saw what I talked about on Tuesday on TV. Did you see the interview I did about you? Oh, if you missed it, okay, this is what I'm going to do to you. and it don't matter what you do to try to stop me, I'm going to make you look like a fool. And then he
Prime
would do
time.
that and then stand over him and point at him and mock him. You would get a penalty a lot, when, taunting nowadays. But Deion, and then in the locker room after the game, after he picked off the Gators in, I think, 87 or 88 and ran one back for a touchdown. I remember in the locker room after the game, he's like looking in everybody's camera. He's like, I told you, I told you, I told you, I told you. And I think I counted like 16 times he said, I told you, and he told us. That's Deion, but yeah, he couldn't tackle, but he was one of the best ever. And, truly, Deion is a good guy. He got arrested once for fishing in a no trespassing area. That's all Deion ever did. So, I love the guy. And, anybody that is so disliked for doing normal stuff, and it seems like it's mostly Florida, like Ray Lewis coming out in the tunnel. It always traces back to somehow Florida. You know what I mean?
It's that swagger, man.
Right.
We're different down here.
Right.
The thing about Deion that I like the most, that he tweeted out about this, he said nobody does it like Prime. This is whenever he went and talked about his pregame rituals, where he would lay out his uniform on the floor, and he said nobody's allowed to even step over it. Everybody knows, don't step over my uniform in the locker room. I wore my money underwear because I was superstitious, and it meant you can count on Prime. Ooh. And he studied all the way up until the game. He would study. And then he goes on to say things like, speaking of the swag, curls look wet, but they dry.
Yeah, he had those Jerry curls, man.
Curls look wet, but they dry. That's my favorite line. I love that so much.
Pull up drip.
So, I mean, another reason why that people don't like Deion is because, so he gets drafted and he goes to the Yankees. And I swear, it must have been his first, second, or third game. He has an inside-the-park home run. And he somersaults over the catcher and touches home plate. Okay? And I remember, I think I was doing my internship at Channel 8 here at WFLA and with Tom Corrin. And I'm like, did you just see what he did? He's like, I'm leading with that. And, back then, you got highlights on the 6 o'clock news. Deion I love. And, he was one of the best characters and always gave you the best soundbite. And again, I always like I talk about, I got another chapter. I go into Dan Marino, and then I talk about Florida Gators football and Urban Meyer, and I talk about how great it is to be a Gator when you have Emmitt Smith, being the NFL's all-time leading rusher. And I talked to Nolan earlier about this before. And then you go into the worst thing ever, the Aaron Hernandez thing. So I'm going literally in my book from the best to the worst thing ever as a Gator. Now, when Urban Meyer, brought him into Florida, everybody knew that he was a troublemaker. I mean, and then Bill Belichick kind of like took a chance on him, and I was like, I can't believe he's actually going to the NFL. But, players play. It don't matter what else happens. You know what I mean? Somebody's going to pick up Antonio Brown next year. And I hear he got in trouble today or something.
The cops showed up at his house for battery.
Great.
Oh, Lord.
So, I mean, you got to be, why the Patriots even was beyond me. But,
Now, we are going to have to transition into some news since we'll leave on the Antonio Brown battery assault, whatever went on in that. But before we transition, one more Deion fact that he said himself. Trick Daddy made a song about Prime years later called NAN. He said that himself. And speaking of NAN, NAN Sports Talk with Kevin Benjamin here. We're going to go ahead and go into break.
Okay.
One more time for the folks at home. Kevin Benjamin, Amazon, The Stigma of Sports in Florida. Very awesome book, and Kevin, we appreciate you for coming on and talking to us about it, man. I mean, we like the stories that you have are great, and that's you bring in something to the table like that a lot of people don't really know about. Not a lot of people don't know about the back end of broadcasting.
All we know is what we hear on TV, and a lot of these guys only give you the information that they want you to hear. Adam Schefter, those guys, they got so much information that they're not even telling. They know who Phillip Rivers is going to. They know, I mean, maybe not Brady, but, there's more to these guys than they can't let it all out at once. But the problem is now with the internet is, oh my God, well, what if Fox scoops ESPN first, and, that's the problem with that. I just want to touch on the table of contents real quick in my book. I do talk about Dan Marino. I got a chapter on him and his legacy. I talk about Tim Tebow. I got a whole chapter on him. I mean, as a Gator, I love him. As a non-Gator, you don't like him, which is understandable because he kind of like, who's the Greek guy who had wax wings and flew too close to the sun. I correlate that to Tim Tebow. He tried too hard, Yeah. I talk about the 02 Bucks and in detail. I go into Seminoles and Bobby Bowden. Of all the good things that they did under Bobby Bowden, there was a lot of stains. Charlie Ward was amazing. That '93 championship team I talk about. Then I go into talking about Warren Sapp. I got a great chapter and some insight. He was not so nice of a guy to some of the female reporters in the locker room after the game, or one in general that I could talk about in my book. And then I talk about the Heat and the Magic. As much as we, don't like to think about it, there is NBA playing in Florida. And LeBron was here. He ruined things for us for a little bit. To be quite honest with you, I probably watched 5 minutes of the NBA since Michael Jordan left. And that was 98, 99. 2000. And then I talk about the Tampa Bay Rays and how Tropicana Field is a debacle. We're never going to get a new stadium in Tampa for baseball because Tampa and St. Pete, the bigwigs and the politicians are never going to come together to figure out how they can equally spend the exact amount of money. One is going to be able to spend more than the other. It's just not going to work. So go to Tropicana Field while it's indoors and take advantage of it while there's still a team. I say, take the Marlins and take the Rays, merge the teams, play half the home games in Miami and half the home games at Tropicana Field.
That's a good idea. I like that.
Or just get rid of the teams and just have spring training. And we kind of ruined that by not building the little stadiums that each little city in Florida had chances to build these amazing stadiums for literally no money that they would have made back in 2 years. And then you have half the teams going to Arizona because these cities in Arizona are like, hey, come here, we'll build you a stadium, And then
as a baseball fan, it breaks my heart that they don't have it here because the excitement of how awesome it would have been to come and see the game.
Could you imagine being in a kayak like in at the Giants in San Francisco, being in the outfield where home run balls are going into the bay, just that whole every time it's Florida. Why isn't that in Florida? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's because you got people that are in charge that can't even take care of friggin' the homeless people on the street. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but listen, I appreciate you guys having me on. You can have me on anytime. Again, the book is The Stigma of Sports in Florida. You can get it on Amazon. It's $6.99 for the ebook Kindle version. You can download tonight, or you can get the paperback version sent to you. If you want an autographed copy, get in touch with these guys, and they'll get in touch with me, and we'll figure something out. And I appreciate you guys.
There we go.
Appreciate you guys having me.
I like it.
And appreciate it, guys.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for being on the show.
All right.
We appreciate you.
Take care. Thanks for listening, everybody. Don't forget to go to Amazon to get my new book, The Stigma of Sports in Florida. You can get the Kindle version to download, or you can get the paperback version. If you want to get an autographed copy, shoot me off a text and we'll figure something out. That's it for now. Thanks for listening, everybody. See ya.